Welcome to today's episode of Auto Insiders, and today I have a really special guest. Many of you might not have any idea who Erin is, but this is Miss Erin Witte. She is the Director of Consumer Protection at the Consumer Federation of America. Welcome, Erin. How are you today?
Thank you. I am doing great. Thank you so much for asking me to be on this podcast and including me and thinking of me. I'm excited.
Well, we're much more excited than you are because and the reason I say that is you have met Zach and I, and you know that we are committed to a level of consumer advocacy, and obviously, as the director of consumer protection for the Consumer Federation of America, so are you. So I would think that our missions sort of kind of align, and I thought that it would be really important to have somebody with your background join us on the show. And if I may, what led you to do what you do? I mean, what moved you in that direction?
So, my job now is I'm a policy advocate at CFA, which means that I push for better laws and regulations to help the little guy. Um, this isn't where I started my career, and I actually started my career as an attorney.
Okay.
I'm a Virginia licensed lawyer. So, when I first started practicing, I actually didn't know that consumer law existed. I wanted to do criminal defense when I was in college. That's what I majored in. I was very interested in things like the Innocence Project and helping people, as trite as that sounds. But so, I've always kind of had that passion, and it's what motivated me. And then when I first started practicing, I was working at a small firm in Northern Virginia. And, we got a lot of phone calls and emails for people who needed help with their car. It was people who bought a car, it broke down, and they couldn't find anyone to help them, but they knew that something was wrong. The dealer may have lied to them, or the car was in an accident, or something like that. So, candidly, I didn't know much about it when I started. I just started taking phone calls and answering emails and meeting with people. And it sort of evolved into a practice of suing car dealers.
Oh, great. uh, Before we get back to suing car dealers, and I must say, many of them need to have that happen. Who, what was it that led you to think that you wanted to be like a criminal defense attorney? Was there some trial you witnessed or something in the news, and you said, "Gee, I want to be like F. Lee Bailey" or something like that?
No, not really. I had some professors in college that really changed my mind on things, right? Like the war on drugs. I was in college in the early 2000s. And so this narrative about the lessons that we learned from the 90s and how minorities were really targeted and oppressed as a result, and sort of stepping in and being able to help people who had been through the ringer and needed someone who
Hmm.
could stand up for them. That was something that I really identified with. So I thought, I didn't think about law school. Frankly, I didn't think that was in the cards for me. I never was that interested in school. I hated studying. I liked going out and doing things, but I didn't think that law school was an option. So I thought maybe I could be a parole officer or probation officer or something like that. And then as I started, I guess, getting a little bit more interested, I had a few professors who reached out and said, you should really consider law school. And then I took a year off between college and law school. I was still living at
Hmm.
home. So I started working at a law firm close to my parents' house. And that was kind of how I progressed into that area.
Well, if I heard you correctly, it sounds to me like there were some people at the college level that really impacted and influenced your life choices.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of times you say you don't always get all that much out of a high school or a college education, but you found or people found you and gave you an inspiration to think about things that you hadn't thought about before. That's kind of remarkable if you think about it.
Yeah, and I would hope that that's what college is for, right? Is opening your mind and thinking about things in a different way and being exposed to a totally different point of view. It doesn't always take, right? Like we don't, as I think as we get older and more set in our ways, we become a lot less open to different perspectives. But I'm so grateful for that experience because I mean, I worked at a gas station for 5 years. I was not really like on a path to a law school career. It was a great job. I loved it. I loved my employer, but it was never something I thought about. And so when I went to college and was working at the gas station at the time, that was how I got my first job at the law firm. Was a customer that came into the gas station regularly. I said I was like thinking about this. Maybe it's something I could do. I'm considering law school, and she said, I have a friend who's an attorney and he needs some help. Would you want to go work with him for a little while and try it out? And I did, and it just kind of grew from there, I guess.
Where did you do your undergrad?
Rowan University.
Oh my! Now, may I say, I actually went to school there before it was Rowan University when it was Glassboro State College.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like many other schools, another college I didn't graduate from. But that's a different story altogether. And if I may, yeah, I'll digress for 1 second because, well, we're allowed to. It's our show. Um, I had a professor at Glassboro. Mark Lipschutz was his name, and he was a film professor. I mean, we went to movies, we studied film, and Mark had a huge impact in my life. Because I remember we would, I was just fascinated by movies and communications and styles and things like that. And we became dear friends. I remember when he got accepted at the American Film Institute in California, that my girlfriend, who was to be my first wife, and we helped drive him from his home to California. And so, yes, college professors can have a major impact on
Hmm.
people's lives, especially if they were teaching at Glassboro or what is now today Rowan University, apparently.
Yeah,
Uh,
I still try to keep in touch with the professor that I had, Dr. Davy. He was the one who taught me about the Fourth Amendment. He taught me about the Innocence Project. He talked about the war on drugs. I read the books that he published. Like the way that he talked about things just really resonated with me. And then candidly, I didn't work that hard in college generally in most of my classes. I just wasn't that interested, but in his classes I did. And in those
mhm.
classes and a few others that were particularly criminal justice related, I just felt so interested and compelled and worked a lot harder. So I think that without his classes and the relationship that we had and without his encouraging me to try law school, I would have never ended up where I am now.
Well, bless his heart, and no, I mean that sincerely,
Yeah.
and to think, you were thinking, well, the Innocence Project and helping people that had been taken advantage of,
Mhm.
on the criminal side of things, and yet today, that's truly, even though it's not necessarily criminally related, you are helping. I mean, your whole mission in what you're doing is helping people, people that get taken advantage of through misuse of consumer protection laws and junk fees and things like that. Um,
Mhm.
I think realistically, when you look back at it, you're going to say to yourself, I've had much more impact, much more of a positive impact in many more lives because of the direction I actually ended up going than on the criminal defense side.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It depends on how you measure impact, right? Like when I was doing criminal defense cases, I didn't work for a public defender. I interned there. I didn't get a job there, but when I was working at the law firm, I did. I was on the court appointed list. So these were people who qualified for assistance because of their income levels, and they would
Hmm.
get appointed an attorney who would take their cases. I did like misdemeanors. So I definitely had that experience of helping I call them consumers, individual clients. Everyone's a consumer in some way.
Yes.
And I know some of my artwork here on my wall, I mean, these are letters from like clients. And so to me, I had impact on individuals, and that means just as much as like, a letter or a comment or something on a regulation that could impact a greater number of people. But
Hmm.
to me, I find that impact on an individual's life and the assistance that I was hopefully able to provide in a really, really tough situation. That's extremely valuable to me. And it
I,
was a rewarding part of my career.
I think what I heard you just say is when you boil it down to helping an individual and you can see the impact you've had on that individual's life, it's a tad more meaningful than when it's such a broad concept of consumer protection that you just don't get the same warm and fuzzies.
It depends. I mean, I get the same warm and fuzzies sometimes, but it's just in a different way. I love what I do now, and I think, and I've been able to like take my experience and translate that into where I am. So I think I've just kind of had a different appreciation for the impact that I have at different levels. So
Can
yeah, I mean, it's really rewarding when you have an individual send you a thank you note, or
Yeah.
a personal thank you is immensely gratifying. But I recognize that the work I do now probably has a different impact on a greater number of people. Hopefully, that's what I hope for.
Exactly, and that's what I meant. The the satisfaction you get when you get a note, a personalized note from somebody that you helped on an individual level, and
Mhm.
and I can relate to that because from our community at Car Edge, we get notes from customers all the time about how we helped save money, we did whatever, and it just it validates why we
Yeah.
do what we do,
Mhm.
uh, and so that was the path I was heading down, and I might have misstated it, but that's
No.
okay. Um, can you share with our audience what it is exactly, sort of, kind of, that you do today?
So, like I said, I'm a policy advocate.
What does
And
that mean?
yeah, it means that I have a lot of ability to work on very broad issues, right? Like I'm an attorney, but I don't represent individual clients anymore. Instead,
Hmm.
what I do is I try to engage with members of Congress. I try to engage with federal agencies like the Federal Trade Commission, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and work with them to make better laws that help people. Consumer protection law is very niche, but it's also very broad. Like there are so many facets of consumer protection law. Auto related issues are a subset of that, but I will work with agencies if they have proposed a rulemaking process to say, here's what's good and bad about what you've suggested. Here's what we'd like to see. I work behind the scenes to help get that regulation to get across the finish line. Members of Congress might reach out and say, hey, we heard from this industry participant about a law that they want to pass. What do you think? And then I can say, well, it seems okay, but you might want to think really carefully about the impact that it's going to have on these people or what that's going to look like.
Well, so I need help here, and
I know
and
it's hard to explain.
yeah, well, no, here's where I need help because if I am not mistaken, there are a lot of consumer protection rules and regulations on the books already that
Mhm.
cover, for instance, a lot of things that we always see
Mhm.
in the automobile business: bait and switch advertising, junk fees, deceptive practices, whatever it is. And
Mhm.
and and I'm pretty sure that most of the rules and regulations already exist. Um, and yet we always feel that there's a need for more to better protect the consumer. But what confuses me is, does any of it matter if there is no enforcement?
Of course not. If no one enforces the law, then it's essentially meaningless. I don't think we're in that position. I think we have a very active Federal Trade Commission. We have several state attorneys general that are really active. And we have individual attorneys who enforce the law for their own individual clients. So, yeah, we need regulatory agencies to enforce that law and remind car dealers and other bad actors that there's a cop on
Mhm.
the.
And so I guess the question that comes to mind when I hear you say that and is how do we get those regulators to be more active in the areas where we know there
Mhm.
are any number of issues?
Yeah, it's I will say, at CFA in my current job, I'll level set this a little bit. I do an annual survey to consumer agencies. These are attorney general offices and
Mhm.
consumer affairs offices who hear from individual people every single day about problems that they have with whatever business it is or consumer facing industry they're dealing with, a cell phone provider, a housing provider, um, a tow company, or whatever. And the number one thing that we've seen for the past, I think, 6 or 7 years is cars.
Mhm.
Autos are an enormous pain point for people. Buying and owning a car is rife with fraud. I mean, I'll be quite candid. There's a lot of it out there. We have a lot of people that buy cars too, right? Cars are originated very, very frequently. Car sales are originated very frequently, and there's a lot of opportunity for fraud. So when you think about how many people there are that have problems and how few employees there are at some of these government agencies, I mean, it is extremely challenging for an agency to navigate all of the problems that people face and then to prioritize what they're going to do. What they choose is like the number one thing. There are really often political pressures in a state AG's office about what they're going to go after and what they're not. Limited resources are always a problem. So, and I will also say that I used to work at the Virginia Attorney General's office. So I have some perspective about how challenging that can really be. I mean,
Mhm.
I worked for the entire Commonwealth of Virginia, and I think we had 8 lawyers, um, 2 investigators for the whole entire Commonwealth. I mean, it's astounding. And we did all the work. We did all the statewide consumer protection work. I mean, there were lots of like, local offices and
Mhm.
things like that could help. But it's really challenging to, I guess, more directly answer your question, which is like, how can we get agencies to do more? I think one thing that is common to probably every agency, whether it's federal, state, local, is that the more they hear about it, the more of an issue that it will become, right? I mean, there are certain things that, like, after COVID is a great example. After COVID, we saw so many people have problems getting refunds for like travel
Mhm.
arrangements, for like cruises and stuff like that. And a lot of agencies got very active on that very quickly because it was this massive problem, right? Of people just getting their money back for something that seemed really straightforward. But yeah, it was like an acute issue. It was something they could do right then, and they heard a lot about it. So agencies got really active.
It just amazes me that there were 8 attorneys and
I
2
know.
investigators for the
Yeah.
entire state of Virginia, and
Hmm.
that's in the consumer protection, division?
Hmm.
And I
I,
I
I hope that I'm remembering that number correctly. It was a very small number of attorneys,
even
and
if okay,
yes.
even if you're off a little bit and there were 10 attorneys and there were 3 investigators,
Mhm.
um, it 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 makes it makes one wonder how seriously states take their obligations towards their citizenry, um,
Mhm.
when they put so few resources to help protect that citizenry. It just
Mhm.
nothing against you or the state of Virginia. I would think it would be normal in most states like that. And so when you put it in that type of perspective, you begin to realize
Yeah.
why it takes so long for anything to happen to the bad actors.
Mhm. And think about, you know, that I'll also say that was just in consumer protection. I mean, the AG's office
Yes.
had several hundred employees that worked on lots of other stuff too.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
but
but I
for
was just talking consumer protection. Yes.
it's massive. Yeah, it's a big there's a gap there for sure. I mean, there are some states that have one attorney that does all of their consumer protection work. It's it can be really challenging. And then like that person then has to think, what do I do? What do I work on? Where do I focus? And
How do I
then,
prioritize? Yeah,
right,
yeah. I
right.
mean that just to hear. I mean that's fascinating to hear that. It
Hmm.
just shows how underserved
Hmm.
state constituents and citizenry is.
Yeah.
There's just not enough. There's just not enough people there to help protect them.
I
Do
completely agree. I think
uh,
it would be phenomenal if we had a much better investment into our consumer protection agencies and staffing them with more attorneys, more paralegals, more investigators, more resources. But I don't make
I
those decisions.
I understand. I was actually talking to a consumer affairs attorney in Ohio yesterday,
Mm,
and he was talking to me about seeing if I could help as an expert witness on something or another, and so the conversation got around to, well, anytime we go to trial, if it's a jury trial, we have a hard time explaining to the jury. And I thought I stopped him right there. I said, wait a second. I don't
yeah.
know anybody in America that hasn't bought a car and hasn't felt like they got screwed by a car dealer. You cannot tell me that if you go in front of a jury, you would have a hard time convincing them that a dealer was guilty. And thought about it for a second. He says, well, yeah, I never have lost a trial that's gone in front of a jury.
Juries usually aren't the problem. It's usually the judge, and you have to get past the judge to get to a jury, and that can be really tricky. I had a few deals
I
with car dealers, and it was like it usually wasn't a problem convincing the jury, but it can also be hard when they see all the paperwork that people signed and they think, well, you signed all this paperwork, so you don't have any opportunity. But, you know, you do what you
there,
can do.
even with all the signed paperwork, and
Mhm.
I the common refrain that customers always would say was, "Well, they wouldn't let me out of there. They just wouldn't let
Mhm.
me leave."
Oh, yeah.
And so I signed everything so I could get in my car and go home. And
Yeah.
and having spent 43 years in retail automotive, the question I always asked was, "Well, did they handcuff you to the desk?" Well, no. Did your legs work? Well, yeah. Well, then why didn't you get the hell up and get out? I mean, but I understand the concept. And the concept is that one person's going to talk to you. And then if you don't say yes yet, they're going to bring in another person to talk to you. And you feel trapped. The whole idea is you feel trapped. You might not really be trapped, but you feel
Right.
trapped. And it wears people down. And I get that. And there's something inherently wrong with that type of tactic to close a car deal. Now,
Yeah. If
having
you have
said
to keep someone in your office for 5 hours to get them to say yes, that seems like a problem. And 5 hours is like the average.
yeah,
It is sometimes days or weeks until you get to yes or whatever. And there's there are many people who they have to get that car today, right? They think that maybe that's their only opportunity to qualify for credit is from this dealer who said that their paycheck was their credit and they're
yes,
not going to be able to get a personal loan from Bank of America, right? They're going to go to this dealer because they think that this is the only way that I can actually afford to pay for a car. Or their car broke down last week and they've been using Uber and they don't have any more money to pay their Uber driver to get to work or to take their kid to daycare. That is their only option, and it is wild um, when you sit down and realize how many people are so like this process of buying a car is just tremendously laden with pressure, but we're all used to it because this is just the way that it's been. It doesn't have to be that way. And that's what I do
exactly.
is try to, like,
Yeah,
change the narrative and say, it doesn't have to be this way. We can change this. We can make the framework better. We can make small changes to really have big impacts. But I think that we're getting there. I think that especially younger people have recognized I don't have to spend 5 hours in a dealership, and I'm not going to. And thank goodness for this. I think we're starting to see a small shift in that regard, but that shift will be an enormous fight. car dealers are certainly going to make sure that that doesn't happen, or try to make sure that it doesn't
Well,
happen.
they're going to try, but I think between what you do and what we're trying to do here at Car Edge,
Hmm.
that perhaps we can we can pull automobile dealerships into the 21st century, kicking and screaming. But we can pull them into it. We can prove to them that there really is a better way, a
Hmm.
fairer way, that's fair for everybody, and it shouldn't have to take I don't know, like pulling people's nails out with a pair of pliers to get them to say yes.
Hmm.
So, what is it that I know there's a letter writing campaign that you're involved? Can you explain what you're working on in that regards at the moment?
I would love to explain what I've been spending the past year of my life on, or maybe a little bit more. The Federal Trade Commission has the authority to regulate car dealers, and they have rulemaking authority that's specific to car dealers that they were granted in 2010. Um,
Hmm.
we had a bit of a mortgage crisis and a subprime housing crisis, and it precipitated the Dodd-Frank Act, which was passed in 2010. And when Congress passed that act, the FTC retained jurisdiction over car dealers because the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau did not get it. There
Hmm.
was a very hard fight to keep them in the jurisdiction of the new CFPB. We lost that fight. So the FTC has kept this jurisdiction over car dealers, but Congress said, okay, you keep that, but you get this rulemaking authority where you can essentially skip a step that you otherwise have to take when you issue a rule. It is not, it's not that unique, it's not that special, it's just different than some of the ways that the FTC has to approach other rulemakings. But it was intentional, right? We have a
Hmm.
decision to do it that way by Congress. And the FTC last summer proposed a rule to regulate car dealers. I use
Yeah.
the word regulate because I think there's a lot of doom and gloom that car dealers are spreading about what this proposed rule is going to do. And frankly, they're wrong. But the rule, one of the main thrusts of the rule is to bring transparency to advertising a car.
Hmm.
You can go to, you can look online for the price of a toaster, and you know that this toaster will cost you $15. You know that when you go to the store to buy the toaster that you saw advertised, you're going to pay
Yeah.
$15 and maybe sales tax.
Wow.
Yeah,
What a
not sold.
concept.
What a concept, right? Knowing how much you're going to pay.
Hmm.
But, let's magnify that by tens of thousands of dollars and say, you want to buy this, whatever it is, Toyota Camry, it's advertised at $25,000. Then you go to the dealer, and there's no way that you're going to pay that amount. It's pretty rare that you would just pay what was advertised. There are fees, taxes, add ons, products, all kinds of things that get tacked on at the dealership that you don't always know about in the advertised price. What the FTC recognized is people spend an enormous amount of time just trying to figure out how much the price of the car is. How
Yes.
much do you have to pay to buy this vehicle? That consumes so much unnecessary time. And that time matters to people. When the FTC was looking at this, they said, what is the time value of what is the value of this time to consumers? They did research about this. They produced data about how much it actually costs consumers to have to waste this time figuring out
Hmm.
the price of the car. So the FTC proposed a rule that would require dealers to be more transparent about car pricing. There's other things within the rule proposal that I won't get into that they're also trying to address with like add-on sales and lots of misrepresentations. But the transparency I think is really big.
And if I'm not mistaken, they asked for the FTC asked had an open comment period,
It did.
and I believe that regulation received quite a bit of comment, much more so than normal. And
Yes.
I would like to say part of it was because of Zach and I
Hmm.
championing that cause.
Hmm.
because it is needed, because there is no reason that a dealer should be able to advertise a vehicle for a price and then not have to sell it at that price. Um, it doesn't make logical sense.
Right.
But then again, nothing in the car business makes logical sense. But so also understand that a couple senators just recently proposed legislation that would force the FTC to reopen that case or something. That set of regulations. What can you tell me about that?
Of course they did. Of course they're trying to undo this, right? Because dealers love being able to trap people at a dealership for 5 and 6 hours and spend their whole day there. They love being able to have a literally captive audience to buy the car that they're selling, and then have the opportunity to pack the sale of that vehicle with unnecessary products,
Mm-hmm.
add-ons, thin etching, I don't know, fabric protection or whatever.
Nitrogen tire fill.
Nitrogen filled tires that don't have
Yeah,
any real nitrogen. Yeah,
yeah,
that's another part of the rules, that they address like the sale of these worthless products.
yeah.
And the FTC is really trying to bring some fairness back. So car dealers are very upset about this. Car dealers have been fighting this rulemaking tooth and nail.
Yeah.
We have been fighting for it tooth and nail because we think that these changes are frankly quite modest and there's no reason not to pass it. Congress told the FTC years ago that they had this authority to pass a rule, and now they're doing it, and it's like the world is ending. But when the FTC proposed it, you're right, they got an enormous amount of public engagement. They received like 26,000 responses. This is something that people care about. I know that you guys did a great job of highlighting the rule and getting people to engage with this and share their experience with the FTC, and they're listening, they're reading all of that, and they're taking these things into account, so your voice really does matter. um, we worked with a public media company called More Perfect Union to shed some light on what the FTC is really trying to accomplish with this rulemaking, and to also show what car dealers are doing behind the scenes to fight the rule and to kill the rule because they don't
Mm-hmm.
want it. Car dealers have a lot of money, they have enormous lobbying influence, and they've really been working hard behind the scenes. They're working with Congress, they're working to propose legislation that would undo the rule and kill it and really make this process so much slower. But consumers have a real voice here. There's an opportunity. I mentioned this video and this letter writing campaign with More Perfect Union. I'm going to share the link hopefully soon, but watch the YouTube video. It sort of sets the
Mm-hmm.
stage, explains what the issue is, and what you can do in response. The comment period on the FTC's original notice is closed, so we can't comment on that anymore. But you can still tell the FTC and Congress how you feel about this by engaging with this letter writing campaign. You can click on the link, you can send a letter to the Auto Dealer Lobby Association called NADA and tell them to back off. Let the FTC do its job. Let them do what they know consumers want. What the constituents of these members of Congress want is to pass a rule, bring transparency, make buying a car like buying a toaster.
What do you think would happen if we actually forced every member of Congress and every senator to have to personally go out and buy an automobile? I mean, literally, they had to go in, not say who they were. You know what? That we're not here in official government business. Hey, it's just me, Mitt Romney. I need a car. Okay. And what do you think would happen if all these members of Congress actually had to go out and buy a car and experience
Mhm.
what their constituents experience on a daily basis?
Yeah.
Do you think at that point that maybe perhaps instead of seeing it through the eyes of the lobbyists who keep treating them to nice dinners and contributing to their campaign reelection funds, perhaps if they started seeing it through their constituents' eyes, they might actually be willing to do something about it?
Well, I think I have a lot of thoughts generally, but about this question. Um, First of all, I think that most of these people probably have purchased cars.
Me
So,
too. Yeah.
but but their experience is not going to be the same as someone who's living paycheck to paycheck, as someone who doesn't qualify for their own credit and has to go to like a buy here, pay here dealer, or feels that they have to go to a buy here, pay here dealer. So I think that instead of going going to buy a car themselves, they should go with their constituents and be invisible. If we're living in this like fantasy world, right? They should be
Okay.
invisible. They should go with a white person. They should go with a black person. They should go with a Hispanic person. They should go with a low income person and say, what experience did they have? How
They
can
should
they
go
feel the
they should go
pressure?
with a if I may, they should go with a female, a
They should go
single
with female.
female, okay? Because I can tell you from 43 years in the car business that single women are treated differently than single men.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and as a manager who tried to train their salespeople to, well, treat women the same as you would treat a man,
Yeah.
and how to change the perceptions in salespeople's minds was virtually impossible at times. But
Mm-hmm.
women, the greatest complaints I ever heard were from women and the way they were treated. If a woman came in with her husband or her boyfriend and the car was for the woman, they made it known that it was for her. The salesperson would still only talk to the boyfriend or the husband.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I had that well, I wasn't buying a car, but my boyfriend at the time was. And you know, I was still practicing law. I was still working at the firm, and I knew a decent amount about it at that point. Not what I know now. I know a lot
yeah.
more now, even than I did then. But before we went in, I was like, listen, you don't need any of the extra stuff they're going to try to sell you. You don't need a service contract. You're buying a brand new car. You don't need this. You don't need that. You don't need all these other things. And we just need to nail them down on the price, and that's what we need to worry about. And that that experience was so wild. It really threw them for a loop when my boyfriend at the time would look to me to say, "Do I need this, or is this right, or what do you think?" I mean, it was like, I'm sorry, what? It
Yeah, why are
couldn't
you
possibly.
asking her?
And I wasn't trying to like assert dominance. I
Mhm.
wanted to make sure he didn't get screwed over because I know the ways that it happens, and I know that he really wanted that car and he had worked really hard to get it. So I wanted to be helpful, but I didn't, I wasn't trying to walk in and show everybody who I was and what I did. And I'm sure I even made mistakes in that process, but the response was just astounding. I mean, they wanted him to sign like an estimate to show it was like a good faith promise that he was actually going to buy the car. And I was like, we're not signing that. They wanted him to buy a vehicle protection package, and I was like, you don't need that. This is a brand new car. It's a beautiful. You don't need it. And they were like, the salesperson looked at my boyfriend and said, I just don't want you to make a mistake because this person is trying to tell you what to do. Um, it didn't go well after that. And I
No,
think that both of our faces are on a dartboard at this dealership to this day, but it was just wild. Yeah.
so so if we get back to that fantasy that we were having a moment
Mhm.
ago, and I unfortunately interrupted because, well, that's just the way I am. Um, um, and we had all of our congresspeople and senators invisibly standing behind different groups of customers as they're trying. Do you think if they if they actually saw what their constituents went through, had to go through to make the second biggest purchase that most people are going to make in their lifetime, so
Mm.
that they would suddenly rethink their positions and go, maybe the way we've got this set up just isn't the right way. Or do you think that all the lobbying dollars just clouds their minds to such a degree that there's no way to clear that fog so that they can see what's really happening?
Uh, I will be optimistic and say I think it would help change their minds. And the reason that I think that is because personal experience does inform legislation. I can't tell you how many legislators I've talked to that said, you know, this really pissed me off because I went through this and I saw how
Mhm.
this happened, or my mom lost $10,000 to a home improvement scam, and I think we really need to crack down on this. I think that that personal experience really does resonate with legislators. And so, but I like the personal experience of buying a car as an affluent white male is 1,000 times different than it is for a black male or a low
Yes,
income
yeah.
female. It's just, it's different. And when you can see it happen, it is astounding and you can't unsee that.
The difference is, in the best way I've ever been able to explain it in all the years that I did what I did, and I learned this probably within the first 6 months of starting in the car business. Those that can afford to pay the most pay the least, and those that can afford to pay the least pay the most. And, and it
Yeah.
doesn't seem
It's,
fair. It doesn't seem right.
nope.
It's just it it has everything to do with those who have a better understanding of the process than those who don't. And the less your understanding is, the greater the likelihood is that you're going to be taken advantage of.
Yeah. It's expensive to be poor.
It
It's,
is, and that's what keeps you poor.
mhm. Yeah, we
Yeah,
call it a cycle of debt for a reason. And you can,
which
sometimes you can have the information, right? Like we talk all the time about consumer education and whether it works or whether it's effective. But that's not always the answer because you can have all the education you want, but research has shown that Black and Hispanic people get a worse deal when they buy a car, generally speaking. They are
yes,
quoted higher prices, they are given higher interest rates. They pay higher insurance for their car. They get hit with fines and fees and lose their vehicles more often. I mean, there are some things that are unfortunately systemic, and we need real changes to undo that problem. But yeah.
and a lot of that has to do with the fact that in those communities, oftentimes people are more concerned with what their monthly payment is than
Yes.
what the actual cost of the product is.
Hmm.
Um, and across the entire spectrum, about 84% of automobile purchasers out there are what are referred to as payment buyers. They just want to know what their monthly payment is and
Yeah.
will it fit into what they've budgeted. And
Right.
what we always try to do at Car Edge is we always try and get people to focus on the total out the door price.
Hmm.
And then once you've understood the out the door price, and you should have an understanding of what that out the door price will translate into for a monthly payment. So that way
Hmm.
you're only looking at cars that'll keep you on a monthly payment you can afford. That then you're at least attacking the right portion of the deal, which
Hmm.
is let's work on that out the door number. Let's understand what the discounts are, what the taxes are, what all the fees are,
Yeah.
and then let's talk about buy rate and sell rate in the finance office because you know
Good
it's
luck
indirect
getting
lending. So my mantra is knowledge is power,
there. Hmm.
and that's a misnomer because it's applied knowledge that's power. If you have the knowledge and you never apply it, there ain't a whole lot of power to that. Um,
Hmm.
and so that's what we try to do is at least encourage consumers to utilize the powers and the knowledge that we're providing them. What in what you do, what more can we get consumers to do to help themselves?
Hmm. I mean, I think being aware of the problem is huge. Buying a car and financing a vehicle is the most complex consumer transaction that consumers face. But we don't think about it that way. I don't think that anyone really realizes how complex it is because when you have sat at a dealership for like 5 hours, we're just going to stick with the average. Um,
Hmm.
I think that we have this false sense of security that because we spent so much time there that we feel like we know what's going on, or, I spent all day there, of course I know what I signed. um, when in reality it's a very small portion of the time that's allocated to like reviewing and signing the documents. It's usually electronic on like an iPad.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think that knowing what you're getting into before you go there is extremely useful. Um, Most of the nonsense that occurs with car dealers when you're buying a car happens in the financing. So the number one thing that I tell people is if you're able to get financing for your vehicle before you go to the dealership, do it. Avoid financing through the dealer. You might pay a slightly higher interest rate. It's a little hard to tell based on, inflation and things like that, but you might pay a little bit more, but you will avoid so much nonsense when you're there. Financing is really easy to get very confused about what's happening. You can change very small pieces of the deal that impact the outcome enormously. And understanding the way all of these pieces fit together and what's good and bad can be really, really tricky. Um, and I don't think that that is a dig at consumers. It's not that consumers are dumb, it's that this process is complex by design. It's on
Exactly.
purpose. It's so that you will just be willing to sign things, get it done with, get out of there, be able to go home to your family with the car that you really like and that you deserve because you've worked hard for it. Um, but yeah, I think that knowledge can be really helpful, but get your own financing. If you can, that's not an option for everybody. Not everyone qualifies for credit or has access to a bank account. So
Hmm.
sensitive to the fact that that can be a real issue for some folks. There are like credit unions and community development financial institutions that can help in like low income neighborhoods. And they really try to work with people to have a successful outcome instead of saying, well, you have a bad credit score, so we're automatically going to charge you like 26% interest just because you have a bad credit score or, low income. Try to find an institution on your own that you can work with and trust, and that's really going to help you have a successful experience to own the car at the end and feel like you knew what happened.
We try to encourage people to find a local credit union that they can
Yeah.
join, um, get pre-approvals for loans before they go to a dealership, so that they
Mhm.
have a better understanding as to what type of interest rates they might have to encounter and endure.
Right.
Um,
Right.
it's that type of stuff. In your line of work, with what you're doing, what would be the ultimate win for you?
Not having to buy a car through a car dealer. I think that we have dealer franchise laws and the books that have been there for so long that require you to have to go through a dealership to buy a car. There
Hmm.
are honest car dealers who do it right, and I am so grateful for them that they can change the narrative and show that it's possible to be successful. But I don't think that we should have to be mandated to go through a dealership to buy a vehicle. We have limited options to do that now with certain EVs, but
Hmm.
I just think that consumers should have more say in the process of how they engage with this purchase of, like you said, the second most expensive thing that they're probably going to buy in their lifetime, or the most expensive thing. Houses are not cheap.
No, they are not, and many of the vehicles we see today are priced at what entry level homes used to be. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
it 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 really is kind of staggering. So the ultimate win for you, if I heard you correctly, is car dealers as we know them would not exist. That you would be able to buy direct from manufacturers, um, and that and that way we could all hope and assume that it would all be on the up and up.
Yeah,
But
that
but
would be
there's
great.
way
I'm sure that there would be lots of opportunities for manufacturers to then take on, other opportunities. But thinking about the world that we live in, I think that would be an enormous step forward. Have the
it,
option, right? We don't have to get
no,
forced through this process.
that would be a huge thing. It really would. I personally, as I like to say to Zach, I say, hey, it ain't. I'm never seeing that in my lifetime. I'm 72 years old, so the likelihood of that happening in the rest of my lifetime is pretty slim and none based on
Thank you.
how
But
deep the pockets are of all these dealer associations.
mhm.
And that to me, the biggest win that you could ever get is if we could somehow, from a consumer protection standpoint, figure out how to get all the lobbying money and all the corporate money out of politics. But as
Mhm.
one of my commenters once said when we were having a conversation along these lines, hey, we got the best government money can buy. So
Not every member of Congress is like that. We work with so many members who are really great on these issues and really, really get it. And they're not out there to make money. But there are many who are and who do. And I think that will be a problem for a long time to come.
yes. Are there any parting words you want to share with our audience about what they can do to help the Consumer Federation of America, and better yet, to help themselves as they're helping the Consumer Federation of America?
Yeah, I think that it's really important to remember that your voice does matter. So often people think that their story, because it didn't, result in a class action lawsuit, or, no one did anything as a result, that people have forgotten, or it doesn't matter, or no one wants to hear about it. That is just not true. If you have been through an experience that you think a state regulator, the Federal Trade Commission, the CFPB, if you've been through something that you want folks to know about, just sharing your story is so helpful. CFA, we don't take consumer complaints, we would just refer you to the agency, but
Hmm.
share your story. Even if you don't hear back, that doesn't mean nothing's happening. Even if the dealership tells you to pound sand and they don't want to deal with it, tell somebody else. Keep spreading the word. Um, I really think that the power in changing some of these laws is going to come from consumers. These are the constituents who have elected each of these folks who have the opportunity to change these laws. Write to them, talk to them, tell them your story. You will become hard to ignore if you're hard to ignore.
I like that. I like that. You can become hard to ignore if you're, well, hard to ignore. That's perfect. Erin, I cannot thank you enough for being a part of this today.
Of
Um,
course.
um, you are welcome back anytime. If there's something that you think to yourself, hey, I'd like to get this out to the world, and perhaps Ray can help spread the word, just let us know. You're always welcome. Um, I really, I just can't thank you enough. Thank you for being here today.
Of course. Thank you for having me. It
Well,
was
you
great
made
to
the
see you.
top five, so
Hopefully, I keep that place.
thank you again, Aaron.
Thank you. Have a good one.